Everybody, and welcome to Inside Mockingbird. This is not the first program, but the first of our evening lectures, and it's called Inside the Great Depression, Economic Realities in To Kill a Mockingbird. I want to cover a few notes before we get started with the program, but I do want to thank you all for coming out tonight on this beautiful night. The program, the whole series of events are brought to you by some community partners that are really invaluable in our work here. And they include Humanities Montana, Fact and Fiction Bookstore, David Moomey, Rocky Mountain Management Services, the YWCA, and Missoula Public Library's Friends and Foundation. Tomorrow, we hope you can join us for the lineup tomorrow, or some of it. We are showing the film To Kill a Mockingbird tomorrow afternoon in this room at 2 p.m. And then tomorrow evening, our lecture is Inside a Girl's Story, Gender Transgression in To Kill a Mockingbird. And we'll have a special feature before that presentation with the teen poets from Missoula, NCBI, Missoula's Respect Clubs. They're going to address the same issue. Before I introduce our speaker, we do have a special feature tonight, and it's music by Maria McGrady and Matt Heisel. They're going to sing some, maybe some familiar stuff for you, and we'll have them come on up and give us a little introduction to our program.
Oh.
My name is Claudia. Thank you so much for coming. And my friend Matt and I are going to be doing three songs fairly related to this. The first song we're going to do is a traditional spiritual. It dates back to a time when it was pretty common to sell children from their parents. So it's called Motherless Child. Now this is Matt Heisel, and the second song that we're going to do is from an opera Gershwin wrote in the 1930s called Porgy and Bess. It's called My Man's Gone Now. And it's based on African-American life in Charleston, South Carolina. And it was first done in 1935 in New York City, and the entire cast featured were classically trained African-American singers, which was kind of a daring choice at the time.
Ain't no use in listening to his tired footsteps climbing up the stairs. Journeying together to the promised land. But oh man, sorrow, much no way with me, telling me I'm more now since I lose my man. Since I lose my man. Oh man, sorrow, sitting by the fireplace, lying all night long by me in my bed. He's telling me the same thing, morning, noon, and evening. Now I'm all alone now, since my man is since my man is dead.
So the last song we're going to be doing is by Nina Simone, called For Women, and it's just a portrait of four different black women. Each represents a different aspect of racism and oppression, from slavery to modern conditions.
back. My arms are long. My hair is woolly. My back is strong. Strong enough to take the pain that's been inflicted again and again. What do they call me? My name is Aunt Sarah. My name is Aunt Sarah. My skin is yellow. My hair is long. Between two words, I do belong. My father was rich and white. He forced my mother late one night. So here I am. My name is Saffronia. My name is Saffronia. My skin is tan. My hair is fine. But my hips are laying about you. My lips are like wine. Who's a little girl and I? Well, yours if you have money to buy. What do they call me? Sweet thing. They call me sweet thing. My skin is brown and my manner is tough. I'll kill the first mother I see, 'cause my life has been rough. I'm awfully better these days, 'cause my parents were slaves. What do they call me? My name is Peaches.
Wow, thank you. Channeling Nina Simone at the library. Bet we haven't heard that before. Moving this up so that our next speaker can be heard. She can walk around it too if she needs to. Thanks again, Matt and Maria. And Maria, you have a weekly gig, don't you? Or
Oh, no.
Oh, no, okay, never mind. You should. So, we're going to give the evening over to our guest, Claudia Durst Johnson. She comes to us from the Bay Area and has lived in just about every part of this country. And that's her home now. She is the preeminent Mockingbird scholar of the nation. And she may kind of blush when I say that and become modest, but I like the sound of it. So, Claudia, I want you to own that. The preeminent Mockingbird scholar of the nation. She's published several books, most lately one called Church and Stage, How the Church Targeted the 19th Century Stage. Tonight she's going to talk to us about the Great Depression and how it relates both to the novel that many of us love and maybe to some current issues as well. It might be hard to avoid that. So please welcome Claudia Durst Johnson.
How can you follow that music? Oh, God, it's tremendous. I guess our topic tonight is the Great Depression, and I hope some of you can help me out with some things about it, though I know none of you lived through it. But the topic of the Great Depression in Mockingbird and in history cannot be separated out from the other major topics of this novel, which are race, class, particularly. And so we have to kind of meld those into our discussion of the Great Depression. And of course, to grasp the full import of the novel, we have to know something about the Great Depression. You can't study this novel outside its setting. It had such a profound impact on this country. And yet, one thing we often forget is that the 1920s, for most people in this country, were not the roaring 20s. The Depression had already begun for especially farmers in the South and the Midwest. As I understand it, and correct me or suggest something if you want, if you need to when I'm talking here. As I understand it, there was a great conflict between especially Southern farmers who were growing cotton and the industrial North, and also between Midwestern farmers and the industrial Northeast. And legislation tended to be passed that favored the industrial Northeast in terms of doing away with tariffs on imports, importing raw materials that were grown by farmers in this country, importing cotton, and so on. So in terms of farming and the setting of Mockingbird in deep Alabama, the produce on farms, the price just dove. It was worth almost nothing because it was easier to import it than it was to buy it. This meant that even as early as the 20s, and you also see this in another great novel. What is it? Grapes of Wrath. What happened is that and this will ring a bell with you if you know what's going on now. The farmer's land and his house came to be worth less than he owed on it. And he was making no profit whatsoever on the stuff he was growing. So this affected not only the people who owned the land, it affected also sharecroppers and tenant farmers who worked the land. So farms throughout the South and throughout the Midwest were in bankruptcy. And as is happening today, at least I don't know what's happening in Montana, there were auctioning off the farms and houses that had been foreclosed upon. And usually this was undertaken by the banks, the bank president, and the sheriff. They seemed to have their way in most cases, and the land just lay foul, without any production. In the Southwest, well, not quite the Southwest. What do you call Texas and Oklahoma and so on, Kansas? In that area, of course. what is it? The whole situation got worse because they had overfarmed it using the same methods year after year after year after year, and with a drought, the topsoil literally blew away. You know all this, don't you? So that there's stories about people living in these little houses out in the middle of nowhere. At night, they would stuff cloths and other things all around the window, over the window, all around the door, over the door, all around the edge of the building. And when they'd wake up the next morning, there would be dust an inch thick on everything. And the children inhaled this. People died of this dust storm. So that was the situation there. In Monroeville and in Alabama in general, the South in general, the same sort of thing was going on. And so you see the old Sarum farmers in To Kill a Mockingbird in terrible, I assume, were tenant farmers or sharecroppers. I'll have to tell you this story, though it's not directly connected with Mockingbird, and that is how this condition was met with in the Midwest, especially Iowa. Farmers got tired of having the bank president and the sheriff come out and auction off the barns and land of their neighbors. And so finally, I think I talked with you guys about it the other night, finally the farmers turned militant. And when there was going to be an auction of property, they would hang a noose down in the door of the farm, in the door of the barn. And this was a signal. You bid on this property, and there might be something pretty bad waiting for you. And there are pictures of this, by the way, photographs of it. One photograph shows the farmers dragging the bank president and the sheriff to the downtown area where the courthouse was, and laying an American flag on the steps of the courthouse and forcing the bank president and the sheriff to get down on their hands and knees and kiss the flag because they considered what was being done un-American. So that was going on even as far back as the 20s. And notice Mockingbird is set in the early 30s. But this is what was being prepared for. Even for some reason, in the 20s, we always kind of think of the Klan's operations as being, more turn of the century and maybe in the 30s. But actually, in the 20s, the KKK had accelerated its efforts, not just in the South, throughout the country. And did you know that the KKK had an 8-year reign in Montana? Yeah. I feel sorry for them because they came to Montana and there were no black people here for. And so then they thought, well, what was their next target? Jewish people. There were no Jews in Montana. But there were a lot of Catholics in Montana. So that was the Klan's 8-year target in Montana. Primarily Irish Catholics. All the way out, I don't know what was going on. I haven't found out what was going on with the KKK in this area. But in Helena, they were very strong and harangued the Catholic schools in Helena and tried to raise money to have their own schools they supported, Protestant schools, as counters to the Catholic schools. And I think they lasted about 8 years. And in fact, I think they were gone before they even started. But I thought that was kind of interesting bit to talk about, since we always think of the KKK in the South primarily. And there were, throughout the 1920s and 30s, something like 20 lynchings, documented lynchings, a year. God knows how many undocumented lynchings there were. But then, after examining the causes of all this, and this is where I hope you can help me out because I'm no economist. Some of you, and this is the problem. Because the Depression was so much like right now in most of the United States, it's easy to carried away with that and forget about Mockingbird. And I don't want to do that entirely. But let's look at some of those things. Some people, as I've told some of you earlier, when I go around talking about Mockingbird, I often talk about the Great Depression. And before everything fell apart recently, like 2 years ago, 4 years ago, in places where I taught, gave lectures, especially in the libraries and the high schools, some of the librarians and the high school administrators and teachers would come up to me and say, when you give that lecture, you don't talk about the Depression. Why do you think that was? How can I talk about Mockingbird without talking about what was this objection? I think they sensed that many of the things preceding the Great Depression were already in progress. And they didn't want me criticizing the country or the administration. I would ask the, I was often told, in one place in particular, the principal told me, they've studied that. You don't need to talk about that. After I'd given my first lecture. So when the next group came in, I said, how many of you have studied American history? All of them have studied American. Where did you stop? The Civil War? Have you ever studied the Great Depression? No. And I said, did you hear that, Evelyn? But anyway, I think it is an important thing to do, to look at it. Now, unfortunately, today, no realistic person can ignore the parallels between the Great Depression and the present economic crisis. So our problem with discussion today is concentrating on those obvious parallels as well as Mockingbird. The consensus is that the root cause of the 1930s depression, the crash that happened in 1929, was lack of regulation of banks and stock brokerage houses, lending institutions. For the first time, many people in the country in the 20s began investing through their banks and brokers, investing in the stock market. Ordinary people began investing in the stock market. For brokers and banks had no regulated guidelines for handling other people's money. Part of the reason for the collapse was that the market inflated the price of various stocks and the dollar became almost worthless. So stockbrokers and other big investors would buy stocks at a modest price. The market would inflate the price, and those at the top of the food chain would sell at the inflated price just before the stocks fell. And of course, nothing like that has happened recently, has it? No one has ever heard of Enron. Buying on margin was a widespread practice whereby the bank would lend you money to buy your stock. So you buy General Motors at $125 a share. You don't really want to put any of your own cash in that. So you borrow from the bank for 10 shares at $125 a share. And then all of a sudden, the plunge came. And you owed the bank thousands of dollars, and your stock was worthless. That was, as I understand it, was one of the chief causes of the crash. And of course, if you bought your stocks and they remain high, fine. But if they fell, you had in the stock and owed your bank money, the money borrowed. Pay up, you might lose your belongings, including your house and business. If you lost your business, the people who worked for you lost their jobs. We were tied to an entire economy whose assets were not backed up by cold cash. In the late 20s and 30s, industry primarily manufactured articles that were considered luxury items: refrigerators, stoves, cars, those kinds of things. And as wages fell and job losses grew, no one could afford to buy these items that were being manufactured. And so businesses were closing. I don't know about your Main Street, but my Main Street looks pretty terrible with the closures of businesses. Uninsured banks closed their doors, leaving their clients out, shut out, away from their life savings. There was no insurance on savings. This came only with the Roosevelt administration. Unemployment was on a massive level, forcing families unable to pay their mortgages or other loans to lose their land and homes. In the 1930s, a total of 90,000 American businesses no longer had the money to operate. The prices of farm produce plummeted. As a result, 1/4 of the labor force lost jobs. 15 million people were out of work. I don't know what the current figures are. What are they? When a man, or maybe his whole family, found work, the wages were at rock bottom and conditions were brutal. One family of 6 working long hours in a Connecticut factory, for example, made a total of $5 a week. There were no government programs, no Social Security, no workers' compensation, no insurance, no safety nets whatsoever. Starvation and malnutrition were commonplace throughout the country. People stood in long so-called bread lines or soup lines set up by private charities to get an allotment of food. And you see pictures of those lines today, photographs of those lines. Those aren't raggedy people in those lines altogether. A lot of the people in those lines have Stetson hats on and nice suits. The New York City Welfare Council reported that 139 people, most of them children, died of starvation and malnutrition in that city in 1933. Large communities, usually around urban centers, made up of makeshift sheds constructed of scraps, discarded slats, boxes, trash, rags, were, set up outside rural areas. I have a wonderful picture of one outside Seattle. Huge area. And you know what they call them, don't you? Hoovervilles. There was the newspapers that they covered themselves with to keep from freezing to death were called Hoover blankets. And cars that you could no longer run because you couldn't buy the gas or it broke down and you couldn't fix it were called Hoover carts. Sometimes they would...
It's in Mockingbird.
Huh?
It's in Mockingbird.
Oh, is it? Often these Hoover carts were drawn by horses sometimes. And people slept in their cars. Cars that had broken down or run out of gas were the Hoover carts. You can see I have a note here, the first paragraph of chapter 14 in Mockingbird for a reference to this. One of the myths about the 20s and 30s, as I've said, was that everybody was living the high life, like Fitzgerald. Drinking a lot, partying a lot, traveling everywhere, doing nothing but what you wanted to do, and that was a myth. There were very few of those people. Now, thousands of men, this is not reflected in Mockingbird, but thousands of men left their families behind to look for work and to escape their responsibilities. And they usually did this by hitching rides on the freight cars. This was illegal, and if they were found by a very strict person working for the railroad, they were thrown off. And you'd wait and hitch the next one. That's how you got around. Some of them, as in the Grapes of Wrath, had fallen apart cars put all belongings and family in to go to the promised land, which was where I live, California. And you know the Woody Guthrie song, California's the Garden of Eden? I can't remember the next two lines. But it ain't so hot if it, well, I don't remember the lines too well, but it ain't too hot if you don't got the do re mi. Do you remember that song? The singer? No, haven't come across that Woody Guthrie song. And that's what happened throughout the South, Kansas, Texas, Oklahoma, was flooded with leaflets. Here you are, your farms grow. You've been thrown off where you lived for ever so long, and there are all these leaflets from California. Jobs in California. Come to California, get a job. So that all they called Okies, remember, headed out to California. And what they found there was no jobs at all. A person would advertise for jobs without a number. Thousands of people would show up, and he'd hire 35 of them. That was the condition there. Not a few of these people who went to California lived outdoors under trees and died there. When families were lucky enough to find shelter in company housing, it was in ragged tents and shacks with no water, no plumbing, and no heat. Now, chapters 2, 3, and 4 in Mockingbird are comments on the Great Depression, if you want to look this up again. And it involves a class struggle, and it involves racism. Because with the Depression, there were so few jobs, there was intense rivalry for jobs between poor whites and African Americans. And so the level of racism skyrocketed because of this in the 1930s, as you see in Mockingbird. I don't think it is just an accident that she mentions Link Dees and his hiring of Tom Robinson. And as you see in Mockingbird, the animosity that the poor whites feel for the blacks is just overwhelming, such that in the face of overwhelming evidence that Tom is innocent, they find him guilty anyway. The very opening chapters tell us the legal trouble of these farmers who had lost or were about to lose their land. You remember the discussion of entailments and Atticus helping out the Cunninghams with no pay. But the Cunninghams are people of honor, not unlike the Ewells. And they say, we're not going to owe anybody anything, nothing. And therefore they pay Atticus in food from the farm, those kinds of things. And Atticus says, lawyers, doctors, all over this town are being paid that way. Part of the Depression. In these chapters 2, 3, and 4, we see the picture of the plight of poor whites in Scouts' first days in school. You remember those things? The poor white children, except for Cunningham, who insists that his son go to school, the poor whites obey the law by sending their children to school for one day in the year. And they show up every year for one day, and that's it. Because of this depression, they have to work all day long in the fields for their fathers. There are references to hookworms, children going to school without shoes, no lunches. The little Cunningham boy, remember, won't owe the teacher any money to buy his lunch, so he goes home and eats at Scout's house. Entailments are mentioned. The taking over of a man's property. The country folk of whom Atticus says the crash hit them the hardest. Mr. Cunningham's situation was illustrative. And this is a quote. Atticus said professional people were poor because the farmers were poor. As Macomb County was farm country, nickels and dimes were hard to come by for doctors, dentists, and lawyers. Entailment was only a part of Mr. Cunningham's vexations. The acres not entailed were mortgaged to the hilt, and the little cash he made went to interest. If he held his mouth right, Mr. Cunningham could get a WPA job. But his land would go to ruin if he left it. And of course, what was the WPA? And what exactly was it?
Well, it depends on the project.
But it was
They laid sewer pipes in.
right. They
Paved
it was a government agency, right?
yeah.
Roosevelt's, one of Roosevelt's agencies. Now, Atticus makes a comment in here, and let me see if I wrote that down. He makes a comment that agency, I believe, was no longer available to the people, the poor people, because he said it was killed by 9 old men. It was ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. And Roosevelt actually tried to pack the court in order to save that particular agency. There were any number of other agencies. Was the CCC? Okay. And the TVA? Yeah. Ways in which Roosevelt tried to form agencies to do work that had to be done and give people jobs. I'm sorry. The agency that was ruled unconstitutional was the NRA, the National Recovery Act. In the paragraph that I just read, we also see reference to part of Franklin D. Roosevelt's program to create jobs. The Works Progress Administration, another of Roosevelt's plans for providing jobs out of the Depression, is mentioned in chapter 27 of Mockingbird. This was the NRA, the highly welcomed National Recovery Act, declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. Atticus says that 9 old men killed it. At school, we see the distressing situation of other poor children. Though little Walter Cunningham goes to school, he has 2 brothers who, like many youths, have to stay home to help their father in the fields. And the Ewell and other children go to school only one day as required by law. Her description of Burris Ewell, one of Mayella's siblings, is alarming and frightening. Not only his physical appearance, but his violent attitude. Many of the fathers feed their families by hunting, both in and out of season. Like many poor but honest farmers, the Cunninghams, the family of Scout's schoolmate, pay for health and legal services with the produce. One of the most damaging results of the Depression, which is at the heart of Lee's novel, was that whites turned against blacks in competition for jobs, worsening the already terrible racial situation. Poor whites often transferred their frustrations over the economic situation to poor blacks, blaming them for their problems and using them as scapegoats. It intensified upper and middle class fear that the underprivileged of both races would rise up against them. And it intensified middle class hatred of the poor of both races. The class issue that I was going to mention here, I think, is something we kind of overlook as part of the Depression. And that has to do with the anger of poor whites against blacks because they believed that African Americans were favored over poor whites by the middle and upper classes. And there's quite a bit, despite the discrimination, there's quite a bit to be said about that. What I see from my own experience in the South is that people, helpers, maids, servants, or babysitters, who were allowed in the house never came from the ranks of poor whites. They were always. Never trust a poor white in your house to cook your food and take care of your baby. But you would trust an African American woman. And this feeling comes through at the trial. The fact that Ewell is so furious is in large measure because he feels that favoritism on the part of the townspeople, the merchants and the professional people, their favoritism of African Americans. One of them got very good deals, but there is that aspect of class in the whole story of the Depression. Well, I'm going to shut up now and answer your questions, and if I can.
What is an entailment?
I think well, for example, if you owe somebody, isn't it kind of like a lien?
I don't know.
If you owe somebody money that you can't pay back, your land is put under an entailment. Is that it?
I got the impression from the book it clearly had to do with owing money and money, but
I should have looked that up before I talked to you. But that's what's wrong, with the Cunningham situation. And that's what Scout brings up at the time of the attempted lynching. Yeah. National Recovery Act? I think it was just another of the Job Corps acts, but it was more far-reaching. And And the court ruled that it was unconstitutional because it was, putting government into what should be private.
Oh, okay, so it's competing with private.
Yeah. Mhm. Or maybe not even competing, but intrusive is what I'm saying, that government should stay out of these matters. Roosevelt he closed the banks, remember, for, 3 days, something like that, in trying to work something out. But right now, if your bank is looking bad and you have as much as, I think, $250,000 in the bank in savings or CDs or whatever, insurance covers that and you don't lose that. But back then, that did not happen. So whether your money was in stocks and bonds or whether it was in a simple savings account, you were up a creek without a paddle. Any other questions?
Actually, also, I'm curious about the gold or the switch for the currency.
Yeah.
What transpired there?
I don't know.
Going from the gold standard onto the paper.
Yeah, I don't know.
I heard that was passed at a very scant session of Congress. And it was.
So you had to, was it that you had to have the gold to back up the paper money?
Yeah, initially it was completely backed by gold, and then it became no longer backed.
Uh-huh.
We used to have some certificates in Federal Reserve notes that $100 notes.
Oh, really? Huh.
But you had to turn your dollar in, product citizens.
Oh. Now, of course, you can invest in gold, but you don't have it in your hands, right?
No, you can buy it.
You can?
Yeah.
Stick it under your mattress. Yeah.
In answer to that gentleman's question, Roosevelt was trying to reinflate the economy, and so he's trying to move the U.S. away from the gold standard, so it became, for whatever reason, illegal for private citizens to own gold.
Ah.
But he was trying to do a lot of things, and there was a deflationary spiral. Fortunately, it's not as bad now as it was then, but he was trying to think if a currency is backed by gold, it's a very tight currency.
Uh-huh.
So he's trying to get away from that.
Ah,
and
so
try
just
and
the
reinflate
opposite.
The economy. So that was
Yeah.
one of the things he's trying to do to get rid of gold.
Ah, well, that clarifies things. Yeah. Uh-huh.
I have a question for you. Does anyone in your audience ever admit to being a family with KKK?
No? Huh?
My cousin had the discussion with me years ago. Her parents were KKK.
In Montana?
No, this would be in New York.
For God's sake.
But from Oklahoma. It's very interesting when we had a family reunion. One of the younger members who was blonde and looked like a skinhead, he was there with his African-American girlfriend. They've since had a child. They're from Virginia, of all places. It took 5 generations to go from KKK to that. But the reason why I asked, does anyone ever admit it?
I guess they don't even know it.
They may not know it because my parents' generation didn't talk about it.
Yeah.
But they, little secrets leak out. And the other thing is, does anybody ever talk about what scapegoats there are today? I mean, it's nice to talk about past tense.
Yeah.
I don't find it very past tense.
No.
Not here in Missoula, when you have gay bashing and you have bum bashing.
What is bum bashing?
Beat up the homeless.
Oh,
It's been a good game in Missoula the last couple of years.
that's
Oh, yeah.
true.
So,
That's true. Or
I
in
mean,
Los
people say,
Angeles.
oh, we don't have black folk here in Montana. We have people we treat, folks.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
As far as KKK, one of the embarrassing things for Roosevelt, and since Mockingbird was set in Alabama, Hugo Black was appointed to
Yeah.
the Supreme Court from Alabama, and after he was appointed, it came out he'd been a member of the KKK.
Right.
So he's
Wasn't
supposed to
that
be this very
astounding?
liberal jurist.
Yeah.
and he-
Well, what you mentioned there, Black responded by saying, I hardly knew what I was doing. It was just like, the family goes to Sunday school, they belong to the KKK, so I just got swept up into it.
You joined
But-
the Masons and the APA,
Now, what was the APA?
the American Protestant Association.
Oh,
We had riots in the streets of the Catholics and people.
Could you talk a little louder, please?
this is priceless.
What did he say? I couldn't hear a bit.
Well, if you were a professional and you wanted a career, there were just certain things you did. And one of them was you joined the KKK, the Masons, the American Political Protestant Association, the APA. And the APA was responsible for thousands of pamphlets and books about nuns having illegitimate babies and secrets of the Vatican, torture rooms and stuff like that. It's very popular in the 20s and 30s.
Was this all over Montana?
It was all over the country.
All over the country?
We had riots in the streets of Butte on St. Patrick's Day, where 3 people were shot and killed in the 1890s in what is known as the APA riot. And it was a national organization.
What an eye-opener, huh?
But those were things you did. It was genteel. It was like, it was like being a Sigma Chi too.
Well, I can believe that.
The KKK has it's most noted for the cross burnings and lynchings and those kinds of things, but like he said, it was an organization that a lot of people joined because they also were known, you could talk to families, maybe some of the poor white families that weren't members of the KKK, but members of that organization came and brought them food, they helped take care of their children, they got them medicines, those kinds of things, and so they were almost seen as a community.
The time is 8:32. The library will be closing at 9 o'clock. And at 15 minutes before 9, Web Alley and the public internet terminals will close.
Do we have to pay attention to that?
We just did. Carry on.
Well, the thing is, Atticus says at some point about the KKK that they're a bunch of, goof-offs. They're a bunch of idiots. Why pay any attention to these people? And that's been one of the criticisms of the portrayal of Atticus, that he didn't sufficiently take into account the dangers of the KKK. So I see what you're talking about.
I'm just saying that, like he said, you just joined it. A lot of people joined it not really believing in it, but because if you wanted, protection, or if you wanted business from KKK members, then you joined their organization and you went through that kind of step just to promote whatever your professionalism was, and that was kind of the baggage that came along. But there was a lot of people that said they really helped us out in some tough times, and that was a different side of them, not that I'm condoning it, but that they kind of had a dual purpose.
Yeah.
They were, in this sense, they were a burial society.
Huh.
And the country was filled with burial societies at that particular time. Like the Odd Fellows and the Rebecca, all those things, those fraternal organizations, the Elks. They made sure your beloved got a proper burial. And they certainly fulfilled the societal need and the community need. But Atticus never conformed. Atticus was an individual who stood against and above all of this.
Yeah.
This is on my nose. That's he's a real hero.
Well, to use a term that has become sometimes kind of distasteful, the book is about difference and how you relate to difference. And it seems to me that the KKK was essentially something to protect you from difference. Whether it were a black person or a Jewish person or a Catholic person, they were in this tiny little world wanting only to deal with people like themselves. And I find that totally at odds with the message of the book, which is climb into somebody else's shoes. Somebody unlike you, your brother who's a boy, Boo Radley, who's, you know, a phantom of some kind, Tom Robinson, who's a black man. Climb into somebody else's shoes to find out what they're feeling. And it seems to me that advocacy of difference, remember these children are fanatically drawn to difference in the form of Boo Radley. They're reaching out. Scout wants to go to Calpurnia's home and see what Calpurnia's home is like. They go to the church, her church. They sit in the balcony with the black people. It's a constant broadening of one's world, which had been subscribed by the plantation system, which wasn't quite yet dead.
You know, but what occurs to me when I hear that idea that the Klan also was like a mutual aid society, it sounds like Hamas and it sounds like the Black Panthers. And those are organizations that are, on the one hand, terrorists, on the other hand, mutual aid. And they come up in response to invasion by outside colonizing forces. So that must have been what the Klan was doing too, would you say? Wasn't that their reason for being?
It kind of sounds like it, because much good as the Klan might have done individual families, they were responsible for thousands of lynchings.
I'm not saying that
It's like
they
the
weren't.
beneficial Nazis.
I'm not saying that they weren't. But I'm just saying they perceived themselves as being set upon. And that was their response in the same way that Hamas or a similar organization is fighting back against what they perceive as injustice.
Yeah. Well, anything of difference is a threat, right?
Well, no, I don't think it's just a matter of difference. I think it's the what happened after the Civil War.
Well, what happened before the Civil War and after the Civil War was a continual decreasing of the world there. You remember?
Well, they were trying to hold on to the old world.
Right.
And they weren't able to.
Yeah.
And that was their response.
Remember, Scout and the community are even suspicious of the teacher who comes from northern Alabama. So I think that approach to difference, whether you're looking at, as we will night after this, the Gothic theme, or whether you're looking at the racial theme, those two plots coming together there at the end, I think it all does hinge on either an intense fear of difference or an intense longing for difference, an attraction to difference. And I think the book comes down on the wider world, not the old lady with the Confederate pistol under her pillow, and not the villain whose name is Robert E. Lee Ewell.
This has nothing to do with what we've discussed tonight, but I'm just curious, you have, it's like some of the things that you're talking about are different elements of kind of society into this book, and so I just have a couple questions. That's what got you into studying Mockingbird in such detail, And the second is, of all these aspects of the book, what seems to be the one that you're most passionate about and why?
Well, actually, my field is 19th century American and 17th century American. I know nothing about Southern literature except a little bit of William Faulkner, and I was assigned this chore to write an essay on To Kill a Mockingbird, and I found that nobody had written anything on To Kill a Mockingbird, even though it was a book which had never gone out of print, which every lawyer in the world says, this book caused me to be a lawyer, which has sold millions and millions of copies. And I found no criticism of it, you know, no analysis of it, I should say. And so I wrote my little article, and it was published by Modern Fiction Studies. And then Twain publishers asked me to write a book, which I did. And then somebody asked me to put together another book of primary materials, and I did that. And various people would ask me to write, a law review would ask me to write on something about the law in the novel. But this is not my area.
So it was just somebody getting you to write an essay that kind of got you into this. So,
Yeah.
so are you glad you did, or is it like, oh my God?
Oh
I
yeah,
can talk about
because
this?
I got to meet her.
Well, I don't know, you know.
Yeah, I got to meet her, and we became fast friends and we talked every week.
So can I shake your hand? Because I wanted to shake the hand of Harper Lee, and so I'll shake the hand that shook me.
Can you tell us a little bit about Harper Lee from your perspective?
Well, she's a lot like Scout. Yeah, I mean, when you meet her, you know that was Scout. I think she was a little tomboy, and like Scout, she was absolutely devoted to her father, and he was her mentor and teacher. He was also a lawyer. Scout is almost unnaturally aggressive, and so is Harper Lee. She's a very confident, questioning, aggressive type of personality. One of the first things you think of when you think of Scout is her language. She's got a pretty salty tongue there, and so has Harper Lee. You'll hear 10 or 12 really pretty bad words when you talk to her on the phone. And they were both, as Jim and Atticus, Harper Lee is like Scout and Jim and Atticus in being a literary person, loving literature and history. So I at the interview, the first time I ever saw her, I felt like I was walking on eggs. I did feel like there were a lot of things that I was not supposed to ask her. And so the question you always ask me, why didn't she ever write another book? I did not ask her that, naturally.
What were the circumstances that you met her?
Well, when I was asked to write the first book, I was living in Alabama, where I taught for a long time at the university where she went to school. And she had a few friends in town from her college days. And I thought, why not? I knew her friends too, you know. And I thought, I'm just going to write her and see if she'll talk to me. I'm not going to record it. I'm not going to write it up. I'm not going to publish it. And as I put it to her, I would like to ask you about the history of the publishing of the book and make sure I have certain information about your life that was, I had to have a chronology of her life in the book to see if that's accurate. And of course, I had to send it. I just put her name on it. There's no address. Handed it to her friend put the address, mailed it, and she wrote me back and said, yes, I'll come up to Tuscaloosa and visit my friend and we can talk. So that's how that happened.
Ms. Johnson, we're going to have to
Vacate the building?
End tonight and remind everyone that Claudia will be here for 3 more evenings.
Two more,
I'm sorry. Can we keep you for 3? And so she'll be available. We can ask her more each evening after this until she leaves. She also has a super early morning. She's going up to the high school in Sealy Lake tomorrow morning for their first class, which starts early, which means she has to leave here even much earlier. So we're going to thank her for being here tonight.